What's up, everyone? Welcome to the next episode of the Branding Deep Dive Podcast. I'm here with Ahmed Cheema, the host, and myself, Abdul Mannan, and we have a special episode for you guys today on the Figs Company, which is a scrubs company, and we're going to be talking about some of the controversy that they've been involved in. So if it's your first time or if it's your third time listening to us, just sit back and relax and enjoy the show.
Other than that, what is going on?
Hey, nothing much. Ahmed Cheema, how are you?
You just say Ahmed Cheema. How are you?
Yeah, Christopher Nolan, Ahmed Cheema, same thing.
I'm doing well, man. It's been a long week this week, but I'm excited. We are recording this after a short interval. Usually it takes us like a month, but this is for the audience that's listening, this is not a full branding deep dive. This is just a impromptu thing that we are putting together because of something that happened. So, now let's jump right into it. What are we talking about today?
So we are talking about the Figs controversy. For those of you guys who have not heard or seen what happened, I'll summarize it real quick. Basically, Figs is a medical scrub company. Like the scrubs are the things that you wear in hospitals usually. They provide their own special scrubs. And they had what I would call a marketing kerfuffle, which basically means they screwed up. And they screwed up by putting out an ad for one of their generic scrubs with a woman with a DO physician badge, and she was reading this medical terminology for dummies book upside down. And that's what they chose to use to market their pink scrubs.
Okay. Let's, before we kind of move on, what is the target audience for the people that are buying
Figs?
Yeah.
So I would say generally any medical professionals, right? So they wouldn't specify whether it's PAs, NPs, MDs, or DOs. So even like respiratory techs, I've seen them wear scrubs. I've seen like OT and PT wear scrubs sometimes, occupational and physical therapy. So it's really anyone in the healthcare field.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I just want to continue. Go ahead.
So they're almost like a luxury scrubs company, and so they put out this advertisement that essentially makes it look like either female physicians or DOs are dumb or just don't know their medical technology. I don't know what was going on. I'm pretty sure that the point of the ad was the scrubs, not necessarily the tag or the fact that it was a woman or the fact that they were dumb, I guess, because they were reading a book for dummies. So the internet went all hell broke loose type of thing and tore them a new one basically for doing that. And the interesting thing is that they put out this marketing ad after the controversy over the president's physician being a DO.
Wait, walk me through that. What's the controversy there?
So as everyone probably knows by now, President Trump, I was gonna say Dr. Trump, President Trump got COVID, tested positive for COVID. He goes into hospitals to get taken care of. And it turns out that the president's physician is a DO, which is a doctor of osteopathic medicine, which is just another track towards becoming a physician in America. And the media rips apart the president's physician for being a DO without knowing what a DO is. They're like, he doesn't have a proper physician. And so this is going on in the news. Clearly, the marketing team at Figs was not paying attention to current events. And so they're like, let's, I think what they were going for was inclusion because, diversity and inclusion is especially in healthcare, representation. So they're like, let's hit female, let's hit women, and let's hit DOs in our next advertisement. We do a lot of RN. Like if you notice a lot of the commercials, they're usually RNs who are usually the front, really. If you think physicians are frontline, it's like nurses are frontline, right? They're up there with patients all the time. And so usually it's an RN. So they're like, oh, I bet we could do a DO. And so they were going for the diversity, and I guess they were just not paying attention to current events, which doesn't make sense at all because healthcare is in current events right now, especially in America.
So, real quick, Abdul Mannan, you are in medical school. What track are you on?
I am a DO. I'm at a medical school that puts out DO physicians, doctor of osteopathic medicine.
Now, so you mentioned two things here. Number one is the uh, just women in healthcare, right? And then the number two is the stigma against DOs. So talk me through that. What's in the medical world, what kind of, not even just medical world, but in the general, the dialogue that happens around DOs, how do you feel as a DO? And, what is it like being a DO?
So I'll just go straight up about it. It's a known fact that there is a stigma against DOs, that they are not actually like the same as MDs or have the same capacity of practice, or in healthcare terms, we call it scope of practice, right? So you have nurses that have a scope of practice, you have PAs that have scopes of practice, and MDs and DOs have scope of practice. So in America, the scope of practice between an MD and a DO is the exact same, meaning they can do the exact same things. They can apply to become the same type of physicians. And if you're not specifically specialized for things like addiction medicine, DOs and MDs can kind of basically prescribe and treat the same way. It's actually the highest level of healthcare in terms of scope of practice.
Mm-hmm.
So RNs might not be able to do certain things that physicians can. PAs and NPs might not be able to do things specifically that physicians can. So it's all about scope of practice. And in terms of the difference between MDs and DOs, it's basically the same.
So what you're saying is there's a stigma against DOs, but in reality, they can do the same things, right?
In America. So I know that the profession exists outside of America, but the scope of practice outside of America is a little bit different, from what I understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for FIGS, their primary market is America, correct?
Yes. Although they have some campaigns outside of America to provide scrubs to medical services that are going on in different countries. Mm-hmm. But I think it's primarily American.
If you understand who is FIGS trying to sell their product to, I think this is a big no-no, right? And so let's talk about that a little bit. You already talked about nurse practitioners, doctors, that kind of thing. How did this happen? Like how does something like this happen?
From a company perspective, I bet we can go into a lot of that in a bit. But in terms of like the basics of what happened, I think it was just an oversight fault. There was no oversight in terms of their marketing, in terms of that specific touch point for marketing, visual marketing. I don't know where the ad was, if it was on their website or on their Instagram or whatever, but I think the crux of the issue is just a lack of oversight.
That's a really important point that I want to touch on real quick, is that not just FIGS, but any product that you have, anything that you're doing, it's important to have some level of oversight. A company has, this chief executive officer, and that they are accountable to their shareholders, right? So you present your information at the meetings and stuff like that. And same thing within the company internally, you have to have certain checks and balances to make sure that stuff like this is not going out, right?
Yeah.
I think if any rational doctor or nurse or DO, like whoever it is, if anyone had seen this ad, it would have been a red flag. I think even when I saw it, I was like, okay, and I'm not a doctor. I was like, yeah, what is going on here?
I was actually going to say, you don't even need a doctor to be like, hey, this is a weird commercial, because here's the thing. They are the brand of FIGS, the way they market themselves. They're essentially, one of the things they do good is they glorify and make appealing the profession of healthcare, even though it's not. It's draining. It burns you out. You become pessimistic. All these things, but they're like, hey, you guys are our heroes. And they had this type of marketing before COVID, right? Healthcare heroes. they really push that. And for them to kind of use some quirky ad to suggest that, whatever, the person in the ad was dumb, it just didn't make sense from their brand perspective, from the
Hmm.
values that they try to push. When you look at all of their other marketing versus this one, it's almost like they hired a new guy or girl, and they're like, they forgot to assign, like, uh, you know, uh, whatever, what do you call it, direct report.
Hmm.
Um,
I think what we have, or what companies generally have to prevent this kind of thing, is they have these brand guidelines, right? And
oh
so
yeah,
I'd be interested to see if Figs has something like that. I haven't really looked into it, but
yeah,
that's like your playbook, right? And so if someone else comes on, you're hiring, and this happens especially when you're scaling, and I'm sure Figs is scaling at a level where they can't personally just look at every single ad. You have to have certain guidelines, certain principles that when you tell people that, hey, we need an ad made or we need a graphic made, you have to stay within these confines,
yeah,
right? This
yeah,
is our brand. And then within this box, you can do whatever you want, but you just can't go outside this box so as to maintain that brand consistency.
yeah. In terms of brand guidelines, that's an interesting thing that you mentioned, because I think they do have a pretty good brand guideline because their marketing has been so consistent, their design has been super consistent in terms of visual identity. Um, Actually, this is an interesting question that I had to you. I was involved in developing brand guidelines for a couple of different or organizations or companies. And one of the things I ran into when I was talking to people about making sure we address or think about every single touch point is I came off as being the lead on the brand guidelines. I came off as almost essentially micromanaging. So it's almost like I kind of made sure I went to the website guy and being like, hey, don't put this, put this. And I went to the social media people and I was like, don't put this, don't put it. You can't, so it was almost like teaching them brand,
Mhm.
but it came off to them as micromanaging. So from a managerial perspective, it's definitely hard to teach culture essentially.
What I will say about that is that it starts at the top, right? So
Uh-huh.
if you are the president of an organization and you show that you value brand consistency and it's important that we stick to these guidelines, then people will understand. And then instead of seeing it like, look, it is a little bit of micromanaging in the sense that you have a certain box you can play within, right?
Right.
You can't just do everything that comes to mind, right? But that's not micromanaging. That's just giving you a set of constraints,
Mm.
right? And so what you have to do is make sure that the leadership at the top level is bought into keeping this brand consistent. And when they are bought into it and they can explain that, look, this is not micromanaging, this is a set of constraints so that our brand stays consistent. I think
Yeah.
that's when you have uh, people that will start to get creative within that box
So
rather
like
than.
when you skip that step of buy-in basically and you jump right into the actual details of brand guideline, I guess that's when people start to think like, hey, this is not as important, or why is he doing this?
100%.
Yeah.
The most important part when you're dealing with people is getting their buy-in, right? So you can even like, man, I've been in cultures where the leaders have not valued putting that time investment and getting your buy-in. And at a certain point, as someone that's just doing the work, you're just like, man, like you get burnt out. You're like, this guy just keeps telling me what to do. I don't care. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you're not you're not passionate about what you're doing. But when you
Yeah.
can explain to them why you're doing what you're doing, and that's why when we're talking about branding, part of a good brand is an internal company branding, right? So not just that we establish this identity so that people know what we're
Externally.
about externally, but
Yeah.
also internally our employees and our team knows this is why we're doing what we're doing. And
Yeah.
so uh, like I don't want to speculate and say what happened here at Figs, but it would seem that whoever was on this project like did not get the memo that like this is what our brand represents, right? And
Yeah.
so they didn't have a box that they were supposed to work within, and that's what you get, right? And so my pushback to that would be, if I were in your situation where people are saying you're micromanaging, I would point to this scenario. I would say look at figs. You know what I mean? Like, the reason why we're doing this is so we have some consistency. And I don't want to micromanage, but there are certain constraints that we have to stay within so that we're
Right.
true to our brand and we're
Yeah.
true to who we say we are, right?
Hmm.
So that's my
And
take on it.
that's so interesting because I think it goes back to conveying the story to anyone that you onboard. So whether it's marketing or research and development or product design, you make sure that part of their training process is to understand the story and to like basically transmit or teach the story so that people can buy in. And I feel like because the marketing team or whoever was responsible for this was not told about the story of figs, it was easy for them to slip up like that. It was almost like a matter of time, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
But the story of figs is interesting too. So I don't know. You asked me about off 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 air or whatever. You asked me about like what their story is and if they're medical professionals. They're actually not. So the company is founded by co-founders, two women, who had a mutual friend, I think, that was an RN or an NP, registered nurse or nurse practitioner, who they saw wearing like these really boxy scrubs, which are like the standard scrubs that you get in a hospital. And they're like, how do you work in that? And so they're like, maybe we should help provide a product that is more functional towards the needs of the person wearing it or using it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where it started. I actually have personal reservations about figs as a company. I don't wear figs. I've never bought figs. And I think a lot of people share the same sentiment as me in terms of whether or not their product is actually worth it, and also the culture they tend to produce amongst medical professionals. But
Let's
that's
talk
like
about that. The culture they tend to produce among medical professionals. What do you mean by that?
so. And this is okay. So here's the thing: they're premium scrubs. Their prices are super expensive, and they barely go on sale. So almost like the Apple of scrubs. But the thing is, their market standard is super low. It's literally scrubs. Like like you wear them and you can't you know. And then all these other companies like Janu and Cherokee and Dickies, they had scrubs, but they knew what the purpose of the scrubs were. So they're like, we're not gonna try to make a buck out of this because like it's not worth it because they're literally meant to be thrown away. And so that is the culture that they produce. And so when you sell a luxury product, it makes the user or buyer feel more important and more valued and feel like they meet the standard of the profession or the career. And so what you have is a bunch of people who have this aspiration and they're not there yet, right? I think their primary target are like students of the different specific fields, like so medical students or nursing students, PA students and stuff. Because if you go out, and I just started my clinical rotations, I've been doing them for a year. You don't see a lot of the older people wearing figs. It's always the younger generation, almost millennials, basically. And so amongst the millennials, they want to meet this standard, and so the scrubs essentially make them feel like a doctor because you kind of have to have a doctor income to purchase them. And so they're almost getting to that standard. But what it does is like it alienates everyone because you walk into a room of like healthcare professionals and you literally feel inferior to the people wearing figs. And it's not like inferiority complex I have because I can buy scrubs. And I think any medical professional can buy scrubs because, and specifically figs, because we're all on loans essentially. And so the cost issue is not a problem. And I think that's also a lot of the justification that the people who buy the scrubs actually have. So like you buy them, they're like, oh man, they're super comfortable, super flexible. And I'm thinking, I warned them. I didn't think they were like as comfortable as they're made out to be.
Wow, that's a lot going on. So I didn't know that about scrubs. So scrubs are
Yeah,
meant to be thrown away.
they're meant to be in. So one of the very common misconceptions that people have are the hospitals are clean. They look really clean, but really they're almost like petri dishes of infections because you have the worst of the worst people coming into the hospital, checking
Mm.
in. And so even the bacteria that thrive in a hospital environment is resistant to a lot of the antibiotics that we would use in what you call an outpatient setting, like in a
Mm.
clinic or urgent care or whatever. And so we are aware of that. And so the environment is very dirty. So even before COVID, the standard, I guess, would be to use your scrubs and then you just throw them away in the hospital. And then the hospital's like cleaning department, like, washes them thoroughly and stuff like that. And then reshelves the scrubs for you to use.
So let me make sure I'm understanding what you're painting right now. So you're saying that essentially wearing figs is like a painter wearing a polo.
Yeah. I think that's a good analogy. That's a great analogy.
That's funny, man. Honestly, I've heard about figs from some of my friends that are in the medical profession, medical field, but I didn't know that scrubs have that kind of, like, they're not something that you like
That's what they're meant to be.
you
Yeah, exactly.
pride. You know what I mean? So I
Now, I will say that there are certain environments in healthcare that you don't need that functionality. So the main functionality that you might need that, or the main setting you might need that type of clothing in is the OR, because we're basically being a little bit operating room. We're being a little insensitive or invasive. We're being a little invasive in the body, and so that opens up portals into the body for potential infections. And so you need a really sterile environment. And on top of that, I'm sure in the OB obstetrics ward, scrubs are super important because there's a lot of bodily fluid exchange, and even in the ER sometimes. But there are environments where you can be a little bit more fashionable with your scrubs
Mhm.
without compromising on sterility. And that's, I think, the niche that they were going for, but then it expanded
Okay.
to even the ER. I think ER physicians are probably the ones, if I was to say the biggest specialty that wears fake scrubs, probably ER physicians or
Mhm.
primary care hospitalists and family medicine and pediatrics and stuff.
Yeah, and so one of the things that you see in marketing is you find people's insecurities, and I know this is a little bit of a bleak view on marketing, but you see this, right? You find where people are insecure, and then you create this product or you create this story, this narrative that says, hey, this insecurity that you have, this is going to solve that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you look at Apple, you look at all these companies, they're not explicitly saying like, hey, this is going to solve your insecurity, but the way the ads are portrayed, the
Yeah.
people, the way they look, all of it is like, it's getting you bought into this vision that having this product is going to make me X, Y, Z, right? In this
Yeah.
case, it's going to make me look like I'm a real doctor, make me look
Yeah.
cool, athletic,
Yeah.
also also smart. So
Yeah.
um, I think that's interesting. And I honestly, I didn't ever look at it this way. So let's talk about the actual, what they did to apologize. There's a saying, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but there's no such thing as bad press. What are your thoughts on this in the case of figs? First off, let's talk about what they did, and then let's get into how they can possibly spin this to their advantage, if that's possible, even.
I think you more recently read their apology, but they essentially apologized for what happened, but in a very ambiguous way. And they said they are working towards fixing the process of marketing so that they have more oversight. And I think in one of their tweets or statements, I read something like they're going to have physician oversight or healthcare oversight on everything they do now. So it's not just a little bit ambiguous, it's a little bit more concrete. So that's what they did. I forget what was your second question.
Yeah, let me touch on that a little bit. One of the things they said was that they'll have physician oversight, which is important. Now, one of the things that you have to understand is that whatever company you're running, whatever you do, you're not going to be 100%, right? You're going to make some mistakes,
Yeah.
and you have to be quick to accept that you messed up. In this case, they did that. We can debate on whether it's uh, genuine or not, but that defeats the purpose, right? Like whatever, they did what they had to do. I think for me, what I'm looking for is if you are adding physician oversight, like give me, and you said in the statement that we're trying to be fully transparent. What I'd like to see coming out of this is that they actually say who their physicians are that are reviewing their stuff, right? So
Yeah.
it can't just be like, we're going to, you see this a lot in politics where they say they're going to do XYZ and then, like it's just general statements and there's no real concrete thing that
Yeah.
we can hold them accountable to, right? And now, another thing I wanted to touch on is that the target audience of Figs is very smart people,
Yeah.
right? So every decision you make as a brand has to cater to that, right? So you have doctors, you have nurses, all these people that have spent years and years and years studying, learning, and they can read through stuff like this, right? So you have to make sure that when you are saying you're going to do something, these people not only are they smart, but they have money, right? They have influence too, right? So you have to make sure that you address your target audience at their level, right? You can't just get away with these bold, general, generic claims like we're
Yeah.
going to add oversight. You know what I mean? You have to be fully
Yeah.
transparent and say who you're bringing on board. And then what I'd like to see is like in a year or so, like all the different campaigns that come out and, have like who the oversight committee was on each of them or something like that, right?
So I think that's a great point, and actually, they have an opportunity there because one of the things you said is who you want to know who is part of the oversight. What's interesting is that the company has what are called brand ambassadors that are physicians and nurses and PAs and RNs or whatever, all these different things. And they're also the target audience. So they don't get paid. I don't know if they get paid or not, but most people probably don't get paid. But to bring them on board and make them part of that review process can be a very easily done. It can be something that's easily done and very transparent because the brand ambassadors are ultimately the people that are communicating that brand to their followers, right? They're the Instagram followers, or they're the Instagram influencers that have a bunch of followers. And so they do have an opportunity there, I think, and it might be worthwhile for them to look into.
Yeah, I mean, a company like Figs who has a following that is as big as theirs, I'm sure people will do this for free, right? Like legit, they would love to be just a part of that, right? And so I don't think it's hard to do. And I think this is a
Yeah,
lesson that every person can take, right? Like one of the rules I have with all the content that I put out is that my family has to be able to see it, right? So after I post it, I mean, I should probably do it before I post it now that I'm seeing this, but generally what I do is after I post it, I send it over to my parents and my sisters and uh, they give me feedback. They're like the first persons that they're the first people that watch it, right? And so not just at the company level, but at the individual level, if you're trying to build your brand, you should also have that oversight, right? Make sure that you have people checking you and you're not just posting things that you think like, I mean, like, I don't want to get into this example, but someone that's clear they don't have any oversight is Mr. President, right? So you look at his Twitter, you know what I mean? It's just like all this
yeah,
stuff, but that
yeah,
that works for his brand. You know what I mean? Like he's able
yeah,
to get away with it. I think most people that are trying to appeal to a different type of audience, you can't you can't get away with mistakes like that. And if you do make a mistake, which is inevitable, you have to be quick to apologize and then take measurable actions to counteract that.
yeah.
Do you think? Uh,
Actually, let me go back to this. The question that you asked earlier was, is there, in this case, is there no such thing as bad press?
yep.
So I used to believe in that maybe back in the day, but now more and more with what you call cancel culture, that people are less assuming they don't provide excuses and they don't look into the details and stuff. I think in this environment of cancel culture, there is such thing as bad press.
So here's where I think this is an interesting discussion. So I don't know if you remember when Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, I think like 2 years ago now, he was being blackmailed by one of these. They had like pictures of him. You know what I mean? Like that's
Yeah.
what. And I remember as an employee of Amazon, I was like, there is no way. There's no way. Like he can. There's like this is bad. Like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But what he did, and I didn't see this coming at all. And I'm sure like people that are really good at PR and that kind of thing, they could kind of work through that. But what he did, do you remember this story?
I can't remember. I remember the story. I can't remember what he did. I don't know what he did.
So what he did is he writes a memo
Mm-hmm.
to the, he submits it to one of these like journalists, like Washington Post or something, right? So he writes a memo saying that I will not give in to like bullying. If someone like me, who is like the richest man in the world, is going to give in to blackmail and stuff like that, it sets a bad precedence, that kind of thing. And so he took all this and what looked like such a bad situation for him, and he was able to win over a lot of general support just based on the fact that he was being blackmailed, right? And
Yeah.
so in this case, I don't know if I see something like that,
Yeah.
but I do want to bring up the point that it's all about the spin. You know what I mean? Like you have to
Yeah.
understand the narrative that's being pushed against you, and then you have to. What he did was understand that this is the narrative that's coming in against me. How do I be the hero in this narrative? And so what he did was, look, I'm being attacked, and
Is it
I'm not going to let in. Go ahead.
who's blackmailing him? Is it Amazon
No, 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 no,
audience?
no, no, no. It was like one of those like I forgot what it's called. Like the Holly.
Competitive companies?
No, it was like a Hollywood Reporter, like one of these
Oh, okay.
TMZ type
Okay.
companies.
So here's the thing though. With Figs, it's their own community attacking them.
I know that's what I'm saying. I don't know if there's something you can do in this
Yeah.
scenario, but what I'm saying, like what I'm trying to get at is that what you have to do in these scenarios is understand what the narrative that's being pushed against you is,
Yeah.
and then spin it to where you're the hero,
Yeah.
right? And it's all about like the cancel culture thing. All they're looking at like who's the bad guy. So really, if you can just spin this to where you're no longer the bad guy, now you're the hero, then they'll start canceling someone else. You know what I mean? So that's my thoughts on it. I don't know, like to be honest, this is not my specialty. I'm not good at like this kind of thing, like this PR
Right.
thing. But what I'm saying is that
Conflict resolution.
yeah, it's like I think there may be a way if you're really good at this kind of thing, really good at understanding the narrative. There may be a way
Yeah.
where you can spin this in a positive.
I think that another component of it is to have a strong story and to have people who are attacking. So in this case, the people who are attacking you know your story, but I think they didn't believe in the story enough to be able to provide excuses for them and to give them an opportunity for retribution or redemption.
Not only that, but I think this kind of pokes a hole at their story in general. You know what I mean?
That's what I'm saying.
Like,
yeah, for sure.
It's like it goes back to what you were saying is like, hey, when you're onboarding, you have to have that story.
And honestly, I think part of the people that are a good portion of the people that are attacking them are the people that had felt cheated from the beginning, but not enough to put them over the edge type of thing. So it's like they know, like the moment you're buying figs, you know you're being exploited. You're like, these are scrubs. I know what they're supposed to be. And you're like, but it does really make me feel good. All the Instagram influencers wear it. That's how they get likes and followers, you know? And so you know you're being exploited. At least with other companies, there's a level of subconsciousness to the exploitation. This is like, man, like this is not what this product is supposed to be for, but whatever, you know? And so the story was not strong enough for people to allow redemption. And I think that's what's happening. And so Figs can totally prove me wrong, but I don't think there's redemption for them right now at all. Like they're downhill. And I think other scrub companies are seeing that and they're marketing appropriately based on that. Like they're not selling the same story. They're selling their product, which is comfortability, flexibility, and functionality. They're not selling, hey, you guys are healthcare heroes. You need these great scrubs to reach that potential. You know what I mean? They're just selling a tool. And so I think they should keep doing that. And I think the trajectory will be positive for them way beyond Figs probably. But I'm excited to see Figs prove me wrong.
All right, Abdul Mannan, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we close up?
Yeah, actually, there's one more thing. I know a big part of your brand or a a company's brand is what you call optics, or basically what people see about the brand and what the brand communicates as being important to them or what their values are. And one of the things, if you've been watching a lot of the physicians' responses to what's going on, the controversy, you see that a lot of physicians have been burnt from a PR perspective with Figs and their customer relations, right? Some of the more prominent YouTubers that are physicians and social media influencers, you see that they've had a bad experience with Figs, and they don't work with Figs. So like some of the biggest physicians on social media, whether you're talking about ZDog MD, Dr. Mike, who's probably one of the most famous DOs, and some of the less popular but still very influential physicians on Instagram, like your Heart Doc, Buck Parker.
Med Bros.
Yeah, Med Bros is well, not as much because he actually wears Figs. He talks about it in his video, but Buck Parker, the general surgeon, none of these guys wear Figs and they all have stories. When this came out, they shared some of their stories about how they've been burnt by Figs. And what's interesting is that I myself have been burned by Figs. Like I've asked them questions about their products and I've gotten no response. And in fact, on Instagram, when I replied to them, I've been read on scene. I've been left on red. I've been read on scene. I've been left on red by this company, and I was like, man, this is not cool. Like as a company, I wasn't as much offended for myself as I was for their company. I was like, this is really bad public relations and customer relation management. It's interesting when you see this controversy play out, because the company understands what optics are. They in fact rejected some of these physicians based on negative optics, or based on some of the things that the physicians were doing that they did not feel were part of the value that they wanted to communicate visually. And so they rejected these what is it called, like partnerships. Yeah. And so it's so interesting to see that although they understand the value of optics, they failed to or they let such an important aspect of optics, which is marketing, fall through the cracks, which is really interesting, because it seems like they didn't really understand it from the first place, which makes me think that, at least. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's you know what it is. It's when you're so focused on portraying a certain image that's not genuine to you. Stuff like that happens,
dude. And it goes back to their story, man. And I never felt that their story was genuine at all. And I think a lot of people felt that way. And so this was just almost what they call the straw that broke the camel's back type of thing.
Yep, exactly.
Authenticity is what it's all about.
Yep. And that is it for this special edition of the Branding Deep Dive podcast, which is actually not a full branding deep dive. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for joining. If you have thoughts, comments, any feedback, please share with us, and we'll see you next time.